introduction is actually a very short capsule statement of what we're going to cover today. This approach called robust action, which I've been working on for the past decade. But before we get started on that, I think it's useful because I try to do interdisciplinary research, and I'm as frustrated as others who recognize how difficult that is. But what I've discovered throughout that is that a lot of people who are not management scientists have some misperceptions about what management research actually is. So I want to, before I jump into what is the main topic of today's gathering, to spend like maybe 10 minutes to try to show what management research actually is, for you to kind of think about this as an academic discipline and how it might be engaging or interesting for you. So let's do that. What I find, I think, is typically people conflate between doing management research and starting a business or creating a business plan. And I think, well, all we do up there is just we're kind of working as consultants or people who try to help start up businesses or to run businesses efficiently, which is an important job, but it's not what we do. And here are some distinctions between that endeavor of doing business, engaging in being a practitioner of business, versus what we do in management as an academic discipline, which is kind of this side. So basically, we are driven by theories. We want to test hypotheses. We want to understand how the world works. We collect data. We run statistics, and we kind of describe what happens. Whereas if you ever started a business, like you want to sell organic blueberries in Vermont, you kind of go and you collect data and you kind of imagine what it might look like for you to purchase the things and get the services and hire people and then eventually make a profit, and you would turn that into an Excel and try to get funding and create a business. So that's not business research, that's running business. And so these two are very different things. There's of course a link between them. Oh, sorry, and I was talking to somebody, speaking of interdisciplinary, and I was explaining this, and he said, oh, so that's like the difference between religious studies, which is the study of the world's religions, what they do, how they work, what it means to run a religion or to be in a religion, versus theology, which is about what is the ideology that drives a certain religion and kind of what keeps, that's an active role of running your religion. Okay, so I don't know if that actually illuminates also as well. And again, there are linkages obviously between these two things, but doing the thing about running a business or creating a business plan is not management research. So what does it look like? A recent review basically said, you can distinguish between two maybe aspects. One is organizations within society. So organizations, if you look around us, there's organizations everywhere. University is an organization. There's a lot of businesses, not-for-profits, all kinds of organizations, and they create all kinds of social outcomes of various types that we might be interested in. So that's how organizations influence society, but also within organizations, we have societies, right? The university, academia, we'll talk a bit more about that. That's kind of a certain type of social structure that has its own rules and norms and conventions and ways of acting. And so sometimes we want to study how organizations work and what is the social structure within them. So some examples of each of those. This is how organizations influence society. So for example, we would be interested in how different types of diversity affect innovation. Okay, so that's kind of one thing. It's like, well, if you have a more diverse organization, it's going to yield more innovation. The ideology of a CEO, how does that influence the types of maybe environmental and social outcomes of the organization? This is a practice that contributes to inequality. Golden parachutes is like sweet deals for CEOs that depart. How that kind of became something that's very normal, very normalized. It's okay for people to depart jobs and get tons of money. So these are the types of things that organizations influence society. And then the other perspective, within organizations, so this, for example, would be a paper about how to motivate people, right? It's like how NASA was able to motivate people, how professions adopt new practices. So anesthesiology, a medical thing, but hypnosis, something maybe making inroads into that specific discipline. And this is, Felipe actually works here at the University of Vermont, and this is our flagship journal, so kudos to him. This is about how you actually run an organization without any hierarchy. There's no boss, there's no boots. It's like, how do you actually do that? So these are the types of things that, those are the two flavors, the two main flavors, perhaps, of management research. Why is this helpful? So I think, and this is kind of why I think management research, everybody should, I think, maybe have at least a brief fleeting interest in it, because we kind of have this assumption that it's like a machine, that that it's a well-oiled machine that somebody thought about, put it together, the rules work, they make sense, everything is kind of optimized, efficient. It's a very strong myth that that's how organizations actually work. And then when people encounter breakdowns in that, they're kind of frustrated. But really, if we think about it, kind of a very strong empirical finding is this is actually never the way any organization works. So that's a very liberating. It's like, wow, it's like, that melts away all kinds of frustrations that we might have in our daily lives. And so, for example, if you look at academia, this very strange world that we inhabit, management can help you understand all kinds of things that you might have noticed. Why do we have so much red tape in universities, whereas startups maybe don't have that characteristic? Why do all of them have value statements that seem to be very vague and but still kind of focus a lot of our attention? Why do people get tenure? It's kind of an interesting question. It's a unique, well, not unique, but pretty limited to academia. And why do we, this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, why do we obsess so much about these things and at the same time recognize how inaccurate they are? So again, these are all things that, I won't get into kind of the research that's been done on all these topics. But again, I think it kind of gives a flavor of the types of things that we're interested in. It's like, well, organizations, we see them, again, very dominant in our world, but let's try to understand what's really going on, what's under the hood, what impacts does it have? Okay, so it's hard to do. The next point I want to make is hard to do. So this is, MySpace is kind of sustainability and business. And, the holy grail actually is to say, if you do more of this is corporate social responsibility. If you do good environmental things, you will make more money. If you can make this claim very powerfully with a lot of evidence, very compelling, statistically very powerful, then in a way, you've kind of solved the whole problem of unsustainability in the world, right? Because organizations will do more of this, they will make more of that, and their incentives will be fully aligned with the world that we want. So let's imagine that you are able to collect 1,000 data points, 1,000 different companies. You get a good measure of their CSR on a scale of 1 to 100. And then you get a good measure of their dollars. It could be their stock value, it could be their profitability. And you have that information, you have these two columns for 1,000 different companies, and you just try to do a correlation between them. What would be the problem with then going from there? And let's say you find something. What would be a problem that you would have in terms of going from here and making that very strong claim that if you do more of this, you'll get more of that? What are some objections you might have? What are some methodological challenges you might face? Anybody want to hazard a guess? At management, by the way, we do interactivity. That's part of the way we work. Yes.
You would know the direction of the causality.
Right. Maybe one thing is that some companies make a lot of money and then they just have all these extra resources and they say, oh, let's do some kind of philanthropy and let's do all kinds of good deeds. So it could be the causal direction is reversed. Fantastic. What else?
It could be a third thing affecting both.
For example?
Where you're based.
Okay, so it could be like
a company, or are you a Ukrainian company?
There might be regulations that are driving the CSR, which is then driving the product, but actually it's the regulations that's the game, and it's not really the volunteer CSR. Good example. Another one.
Different corporations do different things. They have different audiences and products.
So what is really CSR? Like there's a methodological challenge, right? Recently, Tesla. Is Tesla like a good CSR company or not? Right, that came up because all these cars are fantastic, I guess, right? The EVs, we're going to full electrification, which I think is generally considered to be a good thing. But at the same time, like labor conditions, all kinds of other mischievous things happening there, non-unionization. So Tesla, good company or not, hard to tell. Any other? So that's the beginning of a very long list. This is the reverse causality. It could be that it's going this way. Here's an example. So this is Taylor's example. It could be regulations driving this, CSR driving that. And this is maybe there's actually a third thing that's doing both. So maybe a company is very good in innovation. And innovation will yield this, and it will also yield this, but it's not that this is yielding that. Everybody see this? And then we have all kinds of other things. And the thing that you would want to do is to have some kind of random clinical trial set up, right? Where you take, equivalent companies, you give half of them a placebo, half of them don't. But it's hard to kind of go to Google and say, hey, for the next 5 years, can you hold everything constant? And then do this level of CSR. And then 5 years later, we'll come back do a lot of CSR and we're going to compare. I mean, that's like essentially impossible to do. So a lot of what we do in our discipline is try to figure out clever ways statistically to try to disentangle all these difficulties that we have methodologically. But that's why it's actually a hard science. The last thing before I actually get to the gist of what I want to talk about today is to kind of say where it actually lies. And I think sometimes we're very aware of these types of issues, policy level, what the regulator should do, how to price carbon, do more public transportation, and change the building codes. And we have all kinds of suggestions on how to build a better governance or rules structure. And we also have a lot to tell about, to say about should you be composting and how, and what you eat, and whether you should ride your bike. And the organization level is kind of in the middle, right? It's actually very different in flavor, I think, in many regards from these two. And it's about, things that you could do around efficiency and managing risk and doing innovation in your business models and managing your suppliers and so on and so forth. So it doesn't really fit neatly into both of these categories, which I think, this is kind of essentially individual level behavior, psychology, perhaps, and this is political science, policy. It's actually a different beast to some extent. Good, and to end kind of this overview, this is something that I wrote once, Nature Sustainability. It's a good primer if you're interested in how to think about management in the context of sustainability, what it is that management could contribute, then you might want to read that. All right, that's my intro. Any questions on what is management science? Does anybody want to be a management scientist?
China.
Yeah.
All right, good. So that's, I think, the value of the Gun Institute is to bring us together and think about ways we could work. So I'll have a pitch at the end to think about ways to work together. Okay, but what I want to talk to you today is about this thing. Again, it was kind of mentioned in my bio. If there's any modest contribution I've made to the academic space, it's this idea of robust action. So I want to walk you through what that is. Okay. This gentleman is called Herb Simon. He was a Nobel-winning scientist, and to some extent, he's a management scientist. He did a few other things as well. Very, very intelligent person. And he said this thing. And okay, so I think what this does, is basically making a distinction between what we now call complicated challenges and what we're starting to call complex challenges. And this is essentially what he's saying is, look, sending a man to the moon, and this is the 60s, so it's a man. It's like, that's a very complicated thing to do, no doubt. But he said it's actually not that difficult because it's only challenging us on this one dimension, which is our technology. So just to give you a brief recap for those of you who weren't around during the moon landings, this is a complicated challenge. Is something that organizations generally excel at. You give them a goal and resources, they go out and do hard things that they can fully control. And so this is the case for NASA. The story is that in 1961, JFK went to Congress and said, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. That's like a very clear, well-defined mission statement. And then he asked Congress to allocate tens of millions of dollars. There was an organization called NASA. NASA did what organizations do, which is hiring and retaining a wide array of experts, building hierarchies, team structures, coordinating procurement, setting up thoughtful timelines and milestones for completion of all these tasks that led to the landing. And essentially, it was a giant exercise in project management. Organizations are very, very good at that, okay? They could hire the people, they could pay the people, they could set up the timelines. All of that is just very, very bread and butter management science, and it's good for solving these types of challenges. And it triumphed in the case of the Apollo landings. So, but this second statement is, this is the former CEO of Unilever, Paul Pullman, who did quite remarkable things for a while at Unilever, which are actually being reversed as we speak. There's a huge reversal in sustainability in business as elsewhere. So Unilever is one of those places as well. Here she's pointing to two things: eliminating hunger and providing water that can reasonably be classified as grand challenges. And what I think he's saying is that leadership for these types of challenges cannot rely on that same type of action that we just described around NASA, where you have hierarchies and control, but it does require a different style of leadership. So the point that I want to make is that we have tractable problems, which is like putting a man on the moon. And we have kind of these standard management practices that will help us to do those types of things. But we have less tractable problems, or what we could call grand challenges. And those of you who know causal loop diagrams, system dynamics, kind of well, the problem is very hard to grasp. Even the word "the problem" is actually difficult or challenging in terms of what constraints it sets upon us. And basically, the point that I want to say is like, well, for these types of challenges, this is working. But what we often try to do is solve these types of challenges with this type of thinking, and that's not working for us. Okay. So what could work? And this is the idea of robust action. And before I articulate what it actually is, I want to say what it pushes back against, which I think are some failures or some kind of limited successes that we've had in the past. So the first thing that it pushes back against is the idea of information deficits. This is Al Gore. Al Gore is my type of guy, so I want to say that right up front. I think he's a phenomenal, articulate, visionary. I have many good things to say. He also invented the internet. So there's a lot that's very sexy about Al Gore. So the problem is, though, that it really doesn't work, right? Raising awareness, communicating urgency, and so on do not translate into changing hearts and minds, much less to actual behavioral change. And again, I think empirically, it's hard to argue with the fact that it's just not working. And I think another thing to do is to recognize that the message is not the problem. Sometimes people think, oh, we're just the data, if we just tweak it a bit more, then everybody will finally be convinced. Like, I don't think that's going to work, right? It's not that we're lacking information. It's not that we just need that extra bit of information, then everybody will start to behave rationally. It is, I think, that as a way of motivating action, it's fallen short. Another thing that robust action pushes up against is this notion that there's a we. That there is a we out there. That there's a consensus. There's a holistic, a group of people that think in like fashion. And I think, and here I'm going to throw a bit of a provocation out. I think this is dominant in the natural sciences. When I read natural sciences, like, well, here's what we need to do. Well, who is we? I think it sometimes seems to me misplaced to speak in that first person plural and say we, because it presumes that there's unity in values, beliefs, and priorities that simply do not exist in the world. Sustainability-minded folks tend to see the work as couched in science, prudent risk aversion, care for future generations of humans and other species, all these very good values. Others, however, see sustainability-minded folks as worrywarts, skulls, Marxists, coastal elites, and other adjectives that are not nearly as kind. So, right, that's like, there is no we here. There's definitely not, it's just inaccurate to say that there's we. So how do you reach consensus with people who think so differently? I think it seems to be a challenge that is very hard to surmount, to persuade people and to really believe that consensus is something that if we just do that, then everything will fall in place. It doesn't seem to work to me as a theory of change. Just as much as I believe I can never be persuaded by the opposing camp's arguments, I'm sure that they're persuaded that they will never be convinced by mine. Right? It's a very symmetrical situation. The third thing third and last thing that robust action pushes against is and you probably witnessed this, right? Either Apollo project or Manhattan project. Those are the common ones. Apollo project for some good thing. We need to do an Apollo. We don't do dramatic, wonderful, triumphant things anymore. We need to have an Apollo project for solving this problem or that problem. And again, I think that this is not necessarily the best way to think about these types of things. And one thing that we could actually point to is that alongside the success of Apollo, in subsequent efforts, for example, do people remember the space shuttle? They built 5, 2 of them crashed and killed everybody. So that's a 40% failure rate. And it never actually even the rest, it never really got to what they expected. It was like a 2-week turnaround time, very cheap. And I think roughly what SpaceX is doing now was kind of the original vision around that. But this was a failure of a project. So it's also, if we select on a variable that we like, that they succeeded in Apollo, NASA actually failed in many other domains. And it's not always that an Apollo style thing will actually work. That's one other criticism of that. Okay, so I said it's mainly plain English, but I do want to give you the gobbledygook version right here. These are the fancy words that will get you published sometimes. I'll try to break this down into English. I'm doing okay on time. All right. So the italics is what I'll specify in a moment. Okay. So first of all, it's pragmatism. Pragmatism. You know, one of the intellectual forefathers of pragmatism was John Dewey here at UVM. So I don't know how much people have been exposed or read that. It's actually quite dense. So let me. I like to talk about it through an example. My example that I like is that imagine you're in a forest. You're in a forest. You've gone out to hike. And then suddenly you realize you're lost. You've been thinking about your review or two comments, and you're like, your mind is kind of, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, where am I? And then you look and then you do this, and you're like, oh fuck, I don't have my phone. I'm sorry. That's what happens to me. And then you don't have a car, so you're lost. What do you do? And pragmatism kind of says, it says that you're in a predicament. That's actually the term that they use. And what I think I want to point out is that in this scenario, you actually don't want to do standard science. You don't want to kind of sit down and not do anything and test all kinds of hypotheses and collect data and try to think your way out of this problem. That's probably not going to work for you. You're in a situation, you need to figure out a way out to some kind of destination that you think is helpful. And the way to go about that doesn't involve, I think, for me, pure thinking in a kind of the scientific method. So what do pragmatists call for? They call for developing ideas. For example, one can imagine that the angle of the sun might be helpful for orientation, or consider getting a sense of the geology and topography through observation. Maybe the flora and fauna can give you some hints. From there, proceed to what do we call possibilities. One can hypothesize that following the course of a riverbed is a good idea. But it is only a possibility and should not be adhered to blindly, right? So it's a lot about kind of this intuition almost, or kind of sense of possibility, but not being locked in, not being too committed to theory, and being willing to adapt and be flexible. So adjustment might be necessary. As you continue in this trek, you collect more data, your understanding improves, which gives you better insight into how to go to the next steps. Learning and doing are two sides of the same coin. So pragmatism, if you kind of follow this example, it has these characteristics. It's situated, so it's happening in the real world. It's like in a real setting. It's not an abstract exercise. It's provisional. Knowledge and understanding can be reversed if found to be inaccurate. It's contextual. Okay? Getting out of a forest is not the same as extricating yourself from a desert or from underwater or wherever else you might be. And it's action-oriented, which means learning without doing is really not what we're after. Okay, so this is somewhat different from other types of action that we might take. And I think these aspects, these characteristics of pragmatism are very useful for actually engaging with real world problems. Questions? Okay, so here's my kind of, again, those are the fancy words, but what I think is this is kind of stuff that we think is good to do. These are, again, kind of roughly the things that we're pushing back against in this idea of robust action. And these are the things that actually we think are better or more useful to actually getting to some desirable outcomes. Okay, so one is you have to engage with people that you might disagree with. But if you disagree with these people, don't try to persuade them. Work on needs and solutions. There's not that much utility in making extravagant long-term precise plans. You actually need to iterate and experiment. Small wins gain momentum and become more powerful movements eventually, and you need to somehow keep the ball moving even as you succeed in these small wins. So let me just give you some examples that I think could be enlightening. But this is kind of the way that we think it. I think many people think this is the way we need to solve our challenges, and I just don't think this is working. Okay, so here's this idea of participatory architecture, getting engaged with people who think differently from you. So here's some crunchy moms. People have heard of crunchy moms? The crunchy mom movement, which I think is part of Maha now. I don't exactly know the topology of that domain, but it's like in many ways, these folks might have different views, but in some aspects actually could be allies. People who hunt. I think this is probably true of Vermont. And then, of course, all kinds of social justice types of movements. And I think, again, if we're very honest, let me look around the room. People who care about the environment tend to be predominantly white. It is just horrible. It's like one of our biggest failures, I feel. Okay, so, basically, just kind of the first place is like, well, there's all kinds of other people that we might form allyships or work somehow with together who are very different from us, might have different objectives, different worldviews, but doesn't necessarily mean we have to be enemies. Okay, it's kind of a trick question. What is this? It's a wind turbine, good. But what does it represent is actually the more profound question that I want to ask. What does this represent for people? When you see this, what do you actually see? What semiotic thing maybe happens in your brain when you see a wind turbine? Clean energy? Sustainability? Other?
Cheap energy.
Cheap? Good. So you have also an economic and also a climate reaction. Others? Here's some things that I think you can, obviously it's a climate change solution for many of us. Energy independence. Okay, we might not have to import as a country, as a region, whatever, energy. So that's energy independence, but there's also energy autonomy, which is more of an individual level. If you're a farmer, right, you might want to have autonomy over your energy. It might be supplementary income again if you're a farmer. And it's also this, perhaps. And there could be many other things. So this one thing, this one artifact in the real world has many connotations for people. And different people will see different things when they look at it. That's why these are very popular in Iowa, right? I think Iowa is the #1 state of wind energy in the United States, followed by Texas. And not because it's a climate change solution. What other types of inscription? So inscription is the idea that people can assign value that is different from one unitary understanding of what a certain artifact is. So what else is popular, I think? What other types of words or framings or sentiments can we harness in order to engage on these grand challenges? One of them, I think, is the idea of mom and pop businesses. Everybody seems to like small businesses. Some like them because of their quaintness and uniqueness. Some like them because they are approachable and have recognizable people and faces attached to them. Some like them because they keep money in their communities and reflect their values. All of us probably admire them for their grit. So this is like, there's nobody on the political spectrum who says, I hate mom and pop businesses. Nobody ever said that. People hate big corporations, people hate lawyers, people hate academics, but nobody hates small and pop. Nobody hates mom and pop business, I think. So we can do the same thing for locally sourced. I think food waste is a very resonant image. Like people have all kinds of reasons that they dislike food waste. And again, could be from very different perspectives. And recently I was reading about right to repair. Very powerful idea, I think. Right to repair. Everybody wants to be able to own and manipulate their own types of things. Okay, so if we look at this kind of thing and we kind of get these types of sentiments, what is it that when we look at this, again, kind of the answer is this is a truck, but what is the inscription, or what are some inscriptions that might be behind this truck? What does this truck symbolize for, perhaps for some people?
Ego.
Ego? Oh, right, yes. Yes, but not necessarily the electric one. I think that's still the internal combustion engine, I think.
Backup power.
Testosterone flowing more? Not?
Backup power.
Very good. All right, so this is the Ford F-150 Lightning, and this is one of the ads. And they decided to market it in this way. It's like, hey, when you get this car, you actually, or this truck, you actually get this type of thing. All right. Now, again, I think this resonates for people no matter what their ideologies, right? And again, we're not kind of saying, oh, buy this because you're going to help solve the problem of the climate. Buy this because you're going to have backup power. And then let me kind of do a brief departure here into the world of electrification. This is a diagram. This is the amount of energy consumed or charged and discharged by batteries. This is California. This is 24 hours. Okay, so when the sun is up, when California is very sunny, all these batteries are being charged. There's negative energy demand on the grid. And then usually in the evenings when the sun goes down, people go home, they watch Netflix, they turn on the jacuzzi. There's a lot of demand for energy, right? And so now, if you have enough batteries, which might be in your F-150, then all of that energy that you could store pretty much for free during the day, you can discharge overnight. And if you look at what's happening in California for the last few years, it's kind of phenomenal, right? The balancing that you're able to do now as these batteries become bigger and bigger is really reducing all, and especially this peak demand. People know about how peak demand is awful. Peaker energy plants, very, very carbon intensive. The more we can get those out of the way, the more we could flatten that curve, as it were, the more powerful it is. So, the next step is taking this from you individually for your home and to say, well, how does that actually help solve the grid more generally? And then, where do we find energy sources? 5 minutes, I'm always done. So, once we get the idea of a truck as something that's also a battery and an energy solution, and we do all kinds of experiments to try to get this off the ground in terms of, for example, connecting them to the grid, and we get different people interested in these types of solutions, including even, what could be an adversary, or what was traditionally thought of as an adversary. You can still see it in the background here, right? The gasoline. The big oil gas stations, they're now installing some charging stations. So it leads to these types of solutions, which I think are moving us in the right direction. So what robust action is not, though, I don't, even though it doesn't follow these very rational planning, top-down things that I pushed back against earlier, I don't say that this is irrational or unplanned. And it's also not passive, right? So to do all of these things, you have to be kind of sophisticated in terms of harnessing these ideas, framing your solutions in ways that resonate for these different audiences, being able to connect with people without getting into arguments with them. These are the skills, I think, the leadership skills, the organizational skills that are important to move forward on these grand challenges that we face. So to conclude, again, to kind of highlight how this is different in pursuing robust action, leaders embrace ambiguity rather than striving for clarity. Everybody gets to think about the wind turbine the way that they want to. That's not, I'm not going to push it down your throat. If you like it because of X, then that's fine. Somebody else will like it because of Y. We focus on short-term accomplishments rather than long-term goals. And we have to recognize that not all of our solutions are going to move as quickly and decisively and specifically on what we want. But over time, they will accumulate into significant accomplishments. So that's it. Let me just say, yeah, this is my pitch that I promised. Kind of promoting interdisciplinary, if this resonates or these ideas are interesting to you. So why is it good to work with social scientists? Because we have some insight into the bottlenecks, politics, coalition building, and all the other stuff that shouldn't be a problem, but always is. It ticks the box of interdisciplinary research, and we have no labs. We don't need very powerful computers, very, very inexpensive for funding. So those are 3 good reasons to work with your favorite social scientists. That's it.